Hello there. I'm going to provide an introduction by way of a demonstration essentially of the game Sushi Jalapeño War by Xeno Games. The box cover is thus. You can see it's essentially quite an it is an Ameritrash game if you wanted to categorise it as such. Apparently it's very similar to, or it has similarities to Fortress America, maybe a Fortress America Lite, I'm not sure, I don't have that game, I've never played it, I don't know that much about it. But you can see it's got an exciting futuristic cover. You've got helicopter gunships, you've got mechanised units, hover tanks, and infantry, and this illustration nicely illustrates what goes on in the game. It's called Sushi Jalapeño War because they posit an alternate timeline where in the year 2019 this war takes place. Now in 2014 there's supposed to be Wall Street crashes and then the US government collapses, the UN is called in. The year before that, a South African Union had been formed of all this Central and South African countries. And so essentially it's positing a American continent in disarray, even Quebec has seceded, etc., etc. And what happens prior to the war is that Mexico claims the Pacific Ocean and all its fisheries, and after executing some 100 Japanese fishermen, Japan declares war. So hence the Sushi Jalapeño War. So the game actually starts with one Japanese infantry unit on Mexican soil, and the kind of invasion starts from there. Now, the South African Union ally with Japan, so they are aiming to take over Mexico, and in response you have Texas, which has succeeded from the rest of the USA, which is smaller than it is today, joins with the USA, the ones that are left, and ostensibly defending Mexico, but in fact, invading them as the Japanese and South African Union invade. So that's the kind of the premise of the game. What do you get in the game? Well, it's by Xeno Games. I think the company's defunct. It was produced in 1994. There's no designer credited, unfortunately. You get a sort of fairly flimsy box, but perfectly serviceable. You get some Xeno Games flyers, other products, and then you've got a sheet of control counters, which one for each side. So it could be a two-player game, in which case one person's playing the Japanese South African Union side and the other's playing Texas and the USA, or it could be three-player or four-player. If it's three-player, then say, how do they recommend it? They recommend that you have one player plays the USA, one Texas, and then the other is Japan and South American Union. That might be because the South American Union is starting down here and the USA starts here, or potentially can start here. They can get bottled up quite easily, so it depends on the play, but that might be sort of a slightly less favourable side to play. So I get and you win based on your alliance winning, not on individual players winning. There's an 8-page rulebook in the game, but unfortunately, apparently, reading on the web, that Xeno Games development, they hacked the game up, so there's contradictory things in relation to command point costs. So each turn, when it's your turn, you roll for command points, then you spend them to move and fight. And in the body of the rules, it lists how much it costs for movement. It doesn't list how much it costs for battle. And then on the last page, there's different command point costs for movement and includes a cost for battle. And so and there's one or two other things that don't quite gel. There's some unclarities, but it's not difficult. For example, it doesn't tell you if you attack an adjacent area or you have to be in the same area as your opponent to attack. And it doesn't sort of fix things down, but you reading between the lines and other rules like after defender retreats, the attacker can advance really tells you that you attack adjacent areas, but it doesn't explicitly lay it out. So it's a little bit head scratching until you bring it all together. And there's electronic warfare levels, which again are mentioned on one of the tables on the back, but they're not mentioned in the rules, and so you have to decide whether you're going to ignore that, or what I brought in is just a randomization of electronic warfare level. Mentioned in the rules is an electronic warfare bonus on command points, but it doesn't relate to airstrikes, which the table on the back does relate it to. But anyway, I'll show you how the game plays, and it'll be a bit clearer. So the initial setup is like this, but then there's like a pre-game deployment. So Texas is on the board, and every side they have mechanized units. They're quite nice sculpts, but they've got terrible flash on them. You have air cav, you have infantry, and then you have those hover tanks. Now you can choose, you have to have one, Texas has to have one unit in every space, and then deploys the rest of them throughout Texas, the on-map Texas ones. Then you also have a laser shield, that's protection against long-range nuclear attack. You have one or two fighters, so essentially each alliance has three fighters. In this case, Texas has one, USA has two, Japan has two, and South African Alliance has one. And then you also have a number of nukes. Again, each alliance has 4 nukes. So Texas has 2, USA has 2, South African Alliance only has 1, but Japan has 3. And I'll tell you how they work in a minute. So that is how the game sets up. You have a random event, one random event each turn from these cards, and you'll start with the pre-war maneuvers, as they call it. So the Texas player does that, sets up his there. Then the South American Union places his at-start forces in any of the areas that border Mexico, so essentially that's Belize or Guatemala. So at the beginning of the game, that's the South African Union, that is Mexico, and which is neutral, as it were, and then there's also PCC, which is, I think, Pacific. It's a group of Pacific countries in an alliance, Pacific Coast Conference. So they're also neutral, and you're given at-start forces. So you have your handy setup areas here, at-start forces here, and then turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, and turn 4 reinforcements. Now, Texas don't get any reinforcements. They're all on the board at start. And the South African Union have only turn 1, 2, and 3 reinforcements. And you have 8 turns for the game. Your objective is to gain urban supply areas. These are the areas marked with a small flag. Let me just zoom in a bit there. Okay, so you've got Mexico City has a flag. San Luis Potosi doesn't have a flag. Matamoros does. Oaxaca does, etc. like that. Then you also have ports. That's just helpful for the USA and Japan who arrive by sea. It's also the case that there are flags in the USA and here in Texas, but they serve as supply centres. They could potentially be taken. I think it's going to be rare that anyone gets, as Japan or SAU get into the USA, because Japan has to arrive in these in the Pacific ports, Pacific board ports, and the USA arrives on the Mexican Gulf ports. So essentially you gain 5 victory points for each flagged area, 1 victory point for a non-flagged area, and 1 victory point for each enemy unit destroyed. If an area is nuked, you don't gain any victory points for it. And that's why you have the nuke markers, because you can nuke a whole area, so it will remain in that condition for the rest of the game. Okay, so the pre-war manoeuvres. So the South African Union only has 3 at-start forces, and I'm going to put them 1 in Belize and 2 in Guatemala. It can be a good idea. It's the sort of the real twist in this game is the use of the nukes, because it's not certain when an opponent can use their nuke, but because there's always the risk of that, you don't want to bunch up your fellows, because if you have 6 pieces, say, in an area and it's nuked, they're all destroyed. So you're tending to spread guys out, but then obviously, you know, that makes them weaker for defence and attack. So it's that interesting combination of concentration of force versus not so much manoeuvre in this case, but defensive precaution. Okay, so the USA places his at-start forces, which are 2 hover tanks, aircav, and a mechanised unit, in any one Mexican port on the Gulf of Mexico. Now this is interesting. The last game I played, they came in here, and so they were essentially trying to bottle up the SAU, and there was a lot of nukes that eventually blew off around here, and it kind of cut the SAU more or less off from their supply centre. But then at the same time, it was quite risky for the USA, because the SAU were trying to take that port, which would then have cut supply for the USA. There was a chance that they could have been cut out quite early in the game, but it didn't happen that way. So these all have to be in the same area. And I think what we're going to do, we're going to go for Vera Cruz, which is quite a long seaboard here, with the intention then of cutting off the SAU from, say, any Japanese incursion. We don't yet know where they're going to start. I should just mention how the forces are. So each unit only moves 2 spaces, except for the aircav can move. Each unit moves 1 space. The aircav can move 2. Your aircraft always sort of stay off board. You just add them in as a strike anywhere you like, and the lasers don't move at all. Now infantry are worth 1 point. Aircav and mechanised are worth 2, and the armour hover tanks are worth 3. So that means what we have here is we have 3 attack defense value versus 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's a big disparity, but then that is vulnerable for nuclear attack. Okay, then we have Japan. Japan places his at start forces, it says. There's actually only 1 unit, and unfortunately one of my folks broke. Now, just as a side note, this is quite interesting, because I bought this game cheaply probably 10-15 years ago, near when I was sort of first getting back into the hobby. It was listed on eBay, I believe. I must have got it cheaply, because I only ever did really get stuff cheaply, and so it was, you know, a game nobody wanted or was interested in. And then I got it out yesterday, looked it up on Board Game Geek, and they are selling them for €100 for this. And you know, it is shoddy. Like I said, that broke. That's just broken being rattling around in the box. And the sculpts, like I said, aren't fantastic and like that. You can see a flash that you have on the wheel there, and it's a bit difficult with the glare, isn't it? But it's interesting that this is now. I mean, my copy's not worth 100 because I've played it. I've punched the cards out. I've written in pencil, admittedly, on the rule book, but still, the people who pay €100 for this game, that it doesn't even, you can't even play it with the rules as in the box, because they flat out contradict each other and leave a couple of things out. So anyway, where I was like, so Japan starts with just one unit. So he basically chooses a port anywhere on the Pacific Ocean. Also, one thing I forgot to mention, which is probably worth mentioning now before I forget again, is you get freedom fighters. So when you enter one of these flagged areas in the PCC or Mexico, the freedom fighters, there's a chance a freedom fighter will appear. So it's kind of like neutral forces you have to take into account. That doesn't happen now at start setup. So it doesn't say the order set up, but I just set him up in order as it's written in the book, taking that as the given order. So it's interesting that Japanese could come down here and then, take out the USA and then the Texas, but it's not really like that, because in that meanwhile Texas will be spreading out, gaining loads of control markers. So we're going to have the Japanese up here at some point. Okay. No, I'm going to bring them here. And the Japanese go first every turn, so they're going to get the first go. They might even get a nuke, and they can send a tactical nuke to an adjacent area and blow up all those USA forces. It's not likely. It's easier for the Americans and Texans to gain youth. Not very likely. Actually, Japan's only has a 1 in 6 chance initially. So, but I want them to support the breakout of these, is what I'm doing there. Okay, so that's the pre-game setup. Then we start the game with, as every turn starts, with a random event. So the PCC's 20 million attorneys file suit in a US federal court. The US player may not use nukes this turn. Okay, that is interesting. The first person, if you want to use nukes, you roll at the beginning of your turn on the intestinal fortitude table, and that will tell you no you can, yes, no you can't, yes you can, and question mark. The question mark means if someone else has already used a nuke, then you can in that case. So you can see, to start with, Japan, if they're the first person to use a nuke, they will only get the ability on a 1 in 6. Texas is quite keen on using their nukes. They've only got 2. Japan have 3. So you can see Japan's going to have to kind of wait till someone else has used. They can try each turn, but they might not get it. And if you do get the opportunity to use it, you have to use it that turn. You can't wait. So we go with that. Then the other thing we do, and this is in the rules, is that you just take a control marker, a random control marker. Okay, so it's Texas. So they are going to have EWL, initiative, they call it, which essentially means he gets +2 command points this turn. So I mark that like that. Then there's, to account for that EWL level rather than initiative, as we saw in the airstrike table, I just from some blank markers that were in they're actually a different colour from the others, so it's kind of like seeing they were intended for something, but they weren't actually marked. They're just this brown colour. There's 5 of them. I marked them EW2 twice, EW3, EW4 and EW1 for electronic warfare level. If you get the EW1 one, then I just give 1 to each. So that's 2 to USA, 3 to Japan. So this means your airstrikes, you're more likely to get an airstrike the higher EW level you have. 4 for USA and 2 for the South African Union. If no one had the 1, but if you get EW1, just purely because it's not marked on the table, I decided that meant you wouldn't be able to use airstrikes because of the electronic warfare that's going on that turn. Now, another way that it could have been done, which I toyed with, is each time someone gets the initiative, I put a marker on the turn track, and then the number of your markers you have there, that is your EW warfare level. But I decided that this random method is going to sort of move it around more, whereas that would just, you know, benefit. Some people will go ahead and some people won't. So I decided the more sort of balanced method was just to make it totally random. So that is the setup, and Japan is going to roll for intestinal fortitude. So on a 6 they get it no. Okay, so no nukes for them. Then they roll for their command points. That's 2d6. So we have 10. And just to keep track of this, because you need to, you can move and fight with one unit, or fight with and then fight with another unit, and then move, and then the first unit can move, and so forth. You need to keep track. So I use these to help me. So on turn 1, they have to do sea invasion. This only costs 1 command point for all the units. They have to land in the same place. Okay, I've forgotten about that, but for a naval landing, your units have to land in a port under Japanese control. I should have marked these. That's no Japanese control, and that's USA control. So all the Japanese original force, turn 1 forces, at the cost of 1 of the command points, land there. Then we can start moving them out, and we do want to spread them out. So we could potentially attack there straight away. So at the moment they have 10, and so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. However, they can add in, instead of an air strike, you can add in air units as 3 points on attack or defense. So we both have 2 air units, so that would cancel things out. And the attack's interesting because you don't just destroy forces, they basically get pushed back, and then each unit, each at the side takes a casualty. So our base is threatened, so we need to push back the American base. That's going to be silly, I think, that initial confrontation. It's just going to create a mess. So I think we'll actually say that the Japanese starting here. So I'm going to spend another point to move, and just 1 point to move into an area where there's as many units as you like. Then and then 2 points to move into an area that has a flag. Now, because that's a neutral area, I roll on the Freedom Fighters table, and again it's nationality as it were specific. So Japanese are more likely not to encounter freedom fighters, but Texans and the USA are. So essentially Mexico would prefer to be conquered by Japan than America and the USA. So that's a no. So there's no freedom fighter. So I spend 2 points to move into there. So we spent 4 out of our 10 points. I'm trying to spread these out, but leave a credible force somewhere. Okay, we'll spend another 2 for there. Okay. We'll see if there's a freedom fighter. Yes, there is a freedom fighter. Okay, so we spent that point, but there is freedom fighter there. So now we have the option to attack it, which is 2 points. We're going to do that. So I spend 2 points and he has 1. I'm attacking, I can attack with all of those fellows, but I have to choose one as a lead. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 points versus 1. Now you have to, the battle table is this, so if you're even, then attacker loses, defender, so attacker retreats, defender retreats, or no result. You both take 1 casualty, or it goes up to +4. You cannot attack at a minus. So we'll be on the +4 table, and I rolled a 3, which is a D. So the way this works is that, well, because he's a freedom fighter, he's just lost off the board, and my lead unit has to go and any others can. And in fact I'll be moving those 2. Now I've got 3 command points left, and I can move the helicopters too, but they cannot take an area. So all these areas we've moved to are now in Japanese control. So you can see they've got 4 flags already, so that's 20 victory points. And then I'm going to spend 1 movement point to move these to there. 1 command point, sorry. Another command point to move them to there. And then the final command point to move them to there. The reason being that now this port's under our control, we can bring in next turn forces up here. Oh, sorry about the out of focus. Okay, so then we would resolve any combat. So I shouldn't have resolved that combat until now. So that combat's resolved now, and finally airstrikes. So the Japanese have 2 air units, and what you can do here now, supply lines are important. So Japan traces supply lines to these ports, the USA to these ports, Texas to its home countries, and the SAU to these, no, to these 2, yes, to these 2 places where their flags are, I presume, although the rules state it's these ones, but that's where there's no flags there, so I guess it is those 2. And so you can cut supply off, which weakens the other units, makes it, well, it doesn't weaken them, but it makes them harder to move. You cost double the points to move and attack. They defend normally, but they take double losses on retreat. So, and you can cut them off with people, with control markers, and or units and nuclear blasted areas. So we have to watch out for that, and with the airstrike we can do that. So essentially what I could do is send airstrikes here, and they will be out of supply next turn, and that is what we're going to do. Otherwise I could save these air units as for use in defence later on. I'm going to try for an airstrike here though. So on the EW, electronic warfare level of 3, we will be successful 50% of the time, and we are. Okay, so they are out of supply. And I got another airstrike saved up for defence later in the turn. So now we go to the SAU, they take their go. So their turn 1 forces come on Honduras or El Salvador. And we're going to roll for intestinal fortitude, I think. You can do long-range airstrikes, but there's no guarantee they're going to work. You don't use a nuke if you're unsuccessful, but essentially it's a die roll off, a 50-50 chance, but the person with this gets +2 on it. So Texas has that at the moment. I think it's worth it. We're going to go for it because we'll try against the USA. So the SAU, they need a 5 or 6 in this initial stage. No, they don't get it. Okay, so then we go to their command points. They get 7. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And they're not naval moving, so they don't spend a command point for that. But then they will... the US player can't do nukes this turn, can he? So we can go adjacent to them without much fear, without any fear of that kind of reprisal. Okay, so let me see, 1 for them to there, then 1 for all of these to there, another 1 for them attempting to go into there, and I roll for possible freedom fighters. No. Okay, so then we get into there, and these all become SAU controlled. So we've got 4 left. We sort of want to create a buffer here. 1, 2. Yeah, so 1, 2, and then we'll spend 1 to go in there and we'll check for freedom fighters. Yeah, there is 1. Okay, we've only got 1 left, so control point left, so we need 2 to fight them, so we can't fight them. So that's the end of their turn. They've got the possible airstrike. I don't think that's useful anywhere at the moment. Okay, so then we go to the USA. They have their turn, so no possibility of nukes because of the PCC's attorneys, all 20 million of them. I want to show you some combat. Now these will, so we'll just roll for their command points. They get 7 as well. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So again, like the Japanese, they have to come in. Now, if you have an infantry unit... I just realised that's another conflict in the... Another conflict in the rules. Okay, I hadn't realised that before. So if you have an infantry unit, you can arrive at a port not in your control. So the Japanese could actually have done that. The Americans can't. So they have to arrive here and then spread out from it, whereas the Japanese do have an infantry unit on their second turn. So that is interesting. It just gives these different abilities for the deployment of each side. So that's one command point for these all to come in here. Now we have to deploy them out in case that area gets nuked. Now they're out of supply, so it's going to cost double. So let me see, I'm going to go for an attack. So this attack's going to cost 4. That's not worth it, is it? No, that's okay. So let's spend 2 to send these into there. We'll leave that one there, and then we'll spend 4 to attack. Yes, 4 to attack into there. So that's the only movement now for the attack. So we've got 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 versus 2. So even if Japan adds that in, that's 9 versus 5. We're still on +4. So it's actually no point. It's pretty much going to be a bust for the Japs on a 4. Yeah. So what happens then is they have to retreat 1 space, and if they can't retreat, they can be. I think you take double hits. Yeah, so you destroyed if you can't retreat. They're going to retreat back into here. And then the Japanese take 1 casualty. So what that means is you have 4 casualty markers, and that goes there. Once, I won't play a whole game out because this is getting to be a long video. I'll finish at the end of the turn. But once you've had 4 casualties, on the 5th casualty, these all go back down to 0, and then you have to remove 1 unit from anywhere on the board. So you can see that makes it an interesting deployment of forces. You don't have fights and then units being lost and then nobody being left there. You more have like sort of battle lines and areas of concentration with attritional damage being done. So the damage is kind of slow, but it does occur, and obviously the more battles there are, the quicker it will build up. So then these can move in, and that becomes USA controlled. Okay, and then we give USA airstrikes. So what we're going to do is the USA is sending airstrikes against Belize and Guatemala. They only have electronic warfare 2, so it's not very likely going to be successful, but USA is not threatened at the moment. If they are successful, then the SA units here will be out of supply. So I've got a 4 and a 3, unsuccessful, no result. Okay, never mind. So those have been deployed for this turn, and we finally go to their go. And you see how it happens. I'm going to roll for their nuke capability. I rolled a 1, but I'm just going to say, for the sake of argument, that they did get it. Now, your choice is either to attack, and you do this now, you either drop a tactical nuke into an adjacent area, And it has to be with the enemy control markers or units. So, you might hit a control marker just to cut off supply and deny them 5 victory points, because that you can't gain victory points for that space anymore. Or you do it as a long range nuclear attack, which I'm going to do against these Japanese forces here in Los Mochis. So we will roll, so these will be the Japanese and these will be the Texas. Texas gets +2 because the electronic warfare initiative, and the higher roll succeeds. So we've got 8, 9, 10 versus 9. So that's it. Texas gets to land one of their nukes down there. The roll-off simulates, and that's the only function this performs, is your laser performing an attack. I presume perhaps in the original rules the laser units could have been lost or something like that. I had a function, maybe they, I don't know, they're just there. They didn't need to be unit, but it's nifty to have them there. So these are completely out of the game. That still counts as their area, but they won't get any victory points for it. Now you can move through it and even fight from it. I don't think you can fight into it, but it costs 2 extra command points to move into or out of it, and 3 extra command points, so that's 5 to battle into or out of it. So that's a pretty devastated area. And you can see you could have like a row of nukes across Mexico, cutting one side off from the other effectively. So then we go roll their command points. They get 8. And we are going to move them out. So they're going to go into there. Are there any freedom fighters? No. So that's 1 point to move into there. Those ones trying into there. Any freedom fighters? Yes. So they're stopped. We have to spend a point for that. These ones into there. Any freedom fighters? Yes. Okay. We have to spend a point for that. We're going to spend a point to move into there. So they can go again. Then we can move these foes out. Now we can go into Mexico because they're allied to us. We can't share the same space with our units though. So I'm going to move them up to there. And I should have put my helicopters together maybe for the movement bonus. They go into there. And then I have 2 left for a fight, and we're going to attack them. So we got way into +4. That's a 6. Yeah, they're gone. Okay, they can all move into there, but I'm going to leave the helicopter behind. And that is the end of the turn. Oh no, but we've got an airstrike, so they have 1 airstrike they can perform, and they're going to put it down here to try and put their electronic warfare level of 4. They've got a good chance of cutting the supply. Hit, yes. So that, no supply there, so they will be out. Oh no, because they're supplied through the port. Let's just make them out of supply. I'll say it was there instead. Okay. And so then we go to the next turn. So we roll for who has the EW level. That's initiative, sorry. That's going to be the USA. Randomize the electronic warfare levels. Okay. Draw a Event card. Technological breakthrough at Bolivar Space Center in the Amazon. SAU EWL is raised to 3 for this turn. Okay, they're actually on 4. So again, that's a disjunct. It isn't mentioned what that's about in the rules, and it doesn't quite gel with the way I filled in for them. So they're already at the maximum, so I'm going to draw another event card. The United Nations meet on behalf of the PCC's 20 million attorneys and threaten severe sanctions. No player may use nukes this turn. Okay, and so it goes. You get other events like, they're never major, but other people get their EWL level raised. The air strikes, a casualty because of epidemic or disease or whatever. Well, no, it's not actually that. Unrest in Texas relocation camps results in violence. So that is how the game plays, and I think what I'll do is just bring this up to perhaps an hour by but essentially you've seen the game. I'm going to pause the video and play it out a bit more and then come back with an update later on in the game, turn 4, 5, something like that. Okay, so here we are at the end of game turn 4. You can see 4 nukes have been fired off. One against the Japanese, one against the Americans. That was from the Japanese. This against the Japanese, I believe, was... Yeah, that was from Texas. Another from Texas against the Japanese, and one from the SAU against the Americans. And you can see the Americans, they lost their port, and because of a silly move by the Texans, they couldn't gain another port immediately because you can't go in the same area as your ally. So they had to start bringing their forces in here, and ended up giving up essentially on here after that nuke. They tried to fight through to here. They're bringing them around here to assist the Texan player in that direction. And but another silly thing kind of happened in the deployment, in that the SAU have not been able to do much. The last turn they just rearranged their units in this area because they couldn't move past into this area. They can't move by sea, and with the Japanese there, that they can sort of come forward and move through this bottleneck. So it's very interesting the way the deployment works. So I'm not going to continue this game. I have a soft spot for this game. I'm fond of it, but the more I check the rules, the more inconsistencies I see in it, and I can see what it is what they say it is that it's two. There's the designer's rule set and then the developer's rules that have not been. They've both been printed sort of separately into the rulebook without coming into agreement with each other, working at cross purposes. So the more I read it, the more contradictions I see, and I'm not quite sure. Like, either combat happens at the end after all movement, as it says in one section, or it happens during movement, and then you can move units again after. And I think the choice of that will make a difference between, is there actually a difference between air cav and the mechanised units? Because the air cav can move too, they're the only units that can move too, but they cannot take a space. And so the question is, what sort of, I didn't really use them in their ability, except once I hopped some American ones from here over to here, and then further on to join some others here. But if combat happens at the end of all movement, then it would help to have like a reserve on the back lines of air cav, which you can then add to the combat. and then they're going to make a difference because they have that reach. But then the combat description doesn't give any. For one thing, command point cost, and for another, like, can you do that? Attack from a distance with the air cap. So I really need to sit down one day and pin down the rules that I want to play this game with, and sort of continue with it like that, give it a good go to see how that plays, maybe tinker with it, because I think there's a really good game in here. It's just a shame the rule book didn't make it. And it is because I think the good game is for two main reasons. One is the casualty markers. So you can take maximum of 1 casualty per combat. After 4 casualties, you remove a unit. So every 4 casualties, you remove a unit. So the unit loss is quite slow and attritional in that sense. But then you also have the nukes. So the USA and the Japanese lost 2 or 3 units each time a nuke was laid down on them. And that makes it very interesting choices of how to deploy and move your units. And I just taken all the units off just so we can see the board state. So what we have now, okay, I didn't quite finish that. So the Americans ended up coming through. They could trace supply down to here. They actually have Acapulco still, but that's not in supply. I don't think that will count for victory. And they had Villa Rosa and Mexico City, but they were nuked, so they won't count for victory. Then we have SAU here, Japan in the middle region here, and Texas bent up round there. As we finished, it was looking like the SAU were very strong, but they were stuck down there. So it was going to essentially be that Texas, aided with USA, were going to bite into Japan. Japan would have to give way and let the SAU come up and support them. And so there would probably been a cut-off somewhere around here of a division between each side's captured cities. I'll just count them up and see where they're standing now. Okay, so adding up gains and subtracting destroyed units, which was 5 on the USA and the Japanese side. We're at a very close game with 16 to the Japanese and SAU, the Sushi side, versus 15 on the Jalapeño supposedly supporting side. So it is an interesting game. I have to iron out the rules, because you can essentially you can go 2 ways. Do you pay variable control point costs, in which case movement's going to be slower, because with that, for example, it costs 3 points to move armour, so the stronger units cost more, and that I think is going to make for more tactical, strategic games, shall we say, because the deployment will be slower, and do you fight at the end of the turn? So you might deploy and fight, and then that's it. Versus 1 movement point cost for everything moving, or 2 into a flagged area, and 2 for combat, and then fighting and moving at the same time. It could go either way, and it wasn't that wasn't decided, or it wasn't tied down in the rules. Both options are half given. Then the other question is in terms of the electronic warfare, because it's important, the electronic warfare level for nukes and airstrikes according to the tables, but no rules are actually given as to how that occurs, unless it means that everyone has electronic warfare level of 2 normally, and then you can go up to 3 or 4 depending on these cards. Yeah, now it's just 3 on some of them, so raise to 3. But once if you're at 4, then it doesn't mean you go down to 3. So yeah, things to be ironed out. And the suggested retail $45, $46. I would have been well annoyed to buy this game and pay that much for it back in 1994, was it 5, and find the state it was in. Great, all the components are fine, and it's very handy having these on the map. You know, it's not too big. You've got nice pieces to play with. The nuke clouds are wonderful, although you do get 2 more in the game than are required, which is a question mark, and you have 1 odd SAU infantry unit, which I just add into that at start for the turn 1 reinforcements. But yeah, it's funny. How could something like that be produced and sold in all good conscience? Given that, don't pay €100 for it unless you're collecting. You've got money to throw away. But if you do come across it, make sure you nail down the rules as you go, or if you're with people you can greet as you go along. It's a good fun game, not complicated, but nice decisions to make.